In a Pennsylvania hospital waiting room, 5 men watched a football game they weren't really seeing. They wore matching jerseys, shared decades of history, and carried a secret so dark it had shaped every decision they'd made for 20 years. Then a 7-year-old girl with an IV pole stopped in front of them, pointed at a tattoo on one man's arm, and whispered words that made time stop. My daddy had the same tattoo, before he disappeared. In that instant, 5 hearts stopped beating. Because they all knew exactly who her father was. They knew where he'd gone. And they knew that the little girl standing before them, sick and dying, was about to unravel a truth they'd sworn to take to their graves. What happened on that dark October night 2 decades ago? Why did these men freeze when a child recognized their matching tattoos? And what impossible choice will they face when they discover that saving this little girl's life means destroying their own? This is a story about the lies we tell ourselves, the prices we pay for silence, and the moment when the past stops being the past and demands to be faced. If you want to know how far guilt can follow you and whether redemption is ever truly possible, stay with us until the very end. Don't forget to follow the channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of what happens next. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital hummed with that persistent electric buzz that only exists in places where people wait for miracles they're not sure will come. It was the kind of sound that burrows into your skull after the first hour, settles into your bones by the third, and by the 5th hour, when you've watched the same coffee stain on the linoleum tile long enough to memorize its shape, it becomes the soundtrack to every regret you've ever swallowed and tried to forget. 5 men sat scattered across the waiting room like pieces of a puzzle that didn't want to fit together anymore. They wore matching Penn State jerseys, navy blue with white numbers, the fabric worn thin at the elbows from too many Saturdays spent believing that loyalty to a team somehow made you a better man. On the mounted television in the corner, the Nittany Lions were down by 4 with 6 minutes left in the 4th quarter. The volume was turned low, but the announcers' voices carried that frantic edge that comes when everything's on the line and time's running out. Nobody was really watching. Marcus Webb sat closest to the television, his broad shoulders hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees. At 43, he still had the build of the linebacker he'd been in high school. Before the knee injury, before the factory job, before the mortgage and the prescription for blood pressure medication that sat in his truck's glove compartment like a ticking clock. His right hand gripped a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. His left arm, thick and covered in the kind of dense hair that made tattoos blur with age, rested against his thigh. Just below his elbow, barely visible beneath the jersey sleeve, was the edge of something dark, an ink mark that meant more than anyone in this hospital could possibly understand. Beside him, separated by 2 empty chairs that felt like a canyon, sat Danny Kowalski. Thin where Marcus was broad, restless where Marcus was still. Danny's leg bounced with a nervous energy that had nothing to do with the game. His fingers drummed against the plastic armrest, tap, 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 like Morse code for a message he didn't have the courage to send. He was the youngest of the 5 at 38, though the gray creeping into his temples made him look older, especially under these lights that made everyone look half dead already. Across the narrow aisle, slouched in a chair that seemed too small for his frame, was Raymond Ray Booker. Ray had the kind of face that belonged on a union rep or a little league coach, trustworthy, weathered, the face of a man who showed up to things. He'd been showing up to things his whole life, PTA meetings, church fundraisers, Friday night games. His daughter was in college now, full ride to Villanova. His son played JV football. His wife thought he was at the hospital because his buddy Marcus's cousin was having surgery. That's what he'd told her. That's what they'd all told their families. 20 years of showing up, and here he was, showing up to this. Near the vending machines, pretending to read the ingredient list on a bag of Doritos he had no intention of buying, stood Christopher Vance. Chris was the one who'd made it out, or at least, that's how everyone back in Scranton told the story. He owned 3 car dealerships across northeastern Pennsylvania, drove a BMW, wore a Rolex that caught the light every time he checked his phone, which he did constantly, scrolling through messages he wasn't reading, anything to avoid eye contact, anything to avoid the weight of sitting still in this room with these men who knew things about him that his wife, his clients, his pastor, didn't know. And then there was Joel Martinez, standing by the window overlooking the parking lot, even though it was past 9, and there was nothing to see but rows of cars under sodium lights and the distant glow of a Wawa across the street. Joel was the quiet one, always had been, the one who listened more than he spoke, who remembered everything even when everyone else was drunk enough to forget. He had his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and from the tension in his shoulders, from the way his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth, you could tell he was remembering something right now. Something specific. Something that wouldn't let him go. They'd all gotten the tattoos together on a night they swore they'd never talk about. 22 years old, invincible, stupid. The tattoo was simple. So simple it looked like something a kid might draw. 3 interlocking circles with a small cross in the center. No words, no dates, nothing that would give away its meaning to anyone who didn't already know. The tattoo artist in that shop on Lackawanna Avenue had asked what it meant, and Danny had laughed and said it was a fraternity thing. The artist had shrugged and taken their money. $40 each, the cheapest pact any of them had ever made. The game on TV hit a commercial break. An ad for truck insurance blared through the waiting room, too loud, too cheerful. Marcus reached for the remote on the side table, turned the volume down even further. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. That's when they heard it, the soft squeak of rubber wheels on linoleum, the irregular rhythm of someone small struggling with something too big. A little girl emerged from the hallway that led to the pediatric wing. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, maybe 8. She was tiny, the kind of tiny that makes adults instinctively lower their voices and soften their faces. She wore purple pajama pants decorated with cartoon stars and a hospital gown that hung off one shoulder, revealing a collarbone so delicate it looked like it might snap if someone hugged her too hard. Her left leg was in a heavy brace, wrapped from ankle to mid-thigh, and she gripped an IV pole that was nearly as tall as she was. The pole had wheels, but one of them kept catching, forcing her to stop every few steps and adjust her grip before continuing. Her hair was dark, almost black, pulled into a messy ponytail that suggested no mother had been around to fix it properly that morning. Or maybe for many mornings. Her eyes were too big for her face, the way children's eyes get when they've spent too long in hospitals. Alert, watchful, taking in everything because nowhere feels safe enough to stop paying attention. She moved slowly across the waiting room, heading toward the water fountain near the nurse's station. None of the 5 men looked directly at her, but they all tracked her movement with that peripheral awareness men get around children in public spaces. Present, but careful not to seem too present. Helpful, but not intrusive. She made it halfway across the room before she stopped. Just stopped. Froze completely, her small hand white-knuckled around the IV pole. She was staring at Marcus. More specifically, she was staring at his arm, at the tattoo that peeked out from beneath his rolled-up jersey sleeve. Marcus noticed first. He glanced up, caught her staring, and his automatic response was a small, polite smile. The kind you give to kids in waiting rooms to let them know you're not a threat. But the smile died on his face when he saw her expression. She wasn't just looking. She was recognizing. The little girl took 2 unsteady steps forward, dragging her IV pole behind her. She moved closer to Marcus, close enough that he had to lean back slightly in his chair. Her eyes never left the tattoo. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that at first, only Marcus heard it. But the silence in the room was so absolute. The game forgotten, the commercial over, even the fluorescent lights seeming to hold their breath, that her words carried like a stone dropped into still water. My daddy had the same tattoo. Marcus's face went pale, not gradually, instantly. Like someone had opened a valve and drained all the blood from his head in a single second. The little girl's eyes were still fixed on the 3 interlocking circles, the small cross in the center. Her voice was distant, factual, the way children speak when they're repeating something they've been told so many times it's become a kind of prayer. He had it right there, same spot. He showed me once when I asked what it meant. He said... She paused, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. He said only very brave men could have it. He said it meant promises. The room had gone from silent to airless. Danny's leg had stopped bouncing. Ray had forgotten to breathe. Chris's phone slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor, but he didn't move to pick it up. Joel turned from the window, his face stricken, his hands still buried in his pockets like he was holding himself together by force. The little girl looked up at Marcus now, not at the tattoo, but into his eyes. Her expression was neither accusing nor demanding. It was simply open, waiting. My daddy had that tattoo before he disappeared. The word hung in the air like smoke. Disappeared. Marcus tried to speak. His mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. He looked to his right, to Danny, a silent plea for help. But Danny was staring at the floor, his face chalk white, his hands trembling. The little girl took one more step closer. Do you know my daddy? 5 men. 5 heartbeats. 5 men who had spent 20 years building lives on top of a secret that was supposed to stay buried forever. And in that moment, under the fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital, with a football game nobody was watching playing in the background, and a little girl with an IV pole asking a question that had no safe answer, they all knew. They all knew that the past doesn't disappear just because you stop looking at it. It just waits. And sometimes, it comes back in the form of a 7-year-old girl with purple star pajamas and eyes too big for her face, asking about a tattoo that 5 men got together on a night when they swore they were brothers, before they became something else entirely. There are moments in life that split time in half, before and after, before the diagnosis, after the funeral, before the accident, after the lie. For Marcus Webb, Danny Kowalski, Raymond Booker, Christopher Vance, and Joel Martinez, that moment happened on October 14th, 2003, on a stretch of Route 6 between Scranton and Honesdale, Pennsylvania, where the road curves sharply and the streetlights end and the darkness swallows everything whole. But to understand what happened that night, you have to understand who they were before it. You have to see them as they saw themselves. Young, unbreakable, convinced that consequences were things that happened to other people. Marcus was the athlete, the one everyone assumed would go pro until his knee exploded during senior year, and suddenly all those college scouts stopped returning calls. He took a job at the Masonite plant in Jessup, married his high school girlfriend Sarah, and told himself that coaching Little League was enough, that watching other people's kids chase dreams he'd lost was somehow the same as having his own. Danny was the charmer, quick with a joke, quicker with an excuse. He sold insurance now, the kind of job where you learn to read people in the first 30 seconds and tell them exactly what they want to hear. His wife Linda thought he worked late most Thursdays. She didn't know about the poker games in Ray's garage, the ones where Danny lost more than he won and borrowed money he swore he'd pay back next week, next month, next year. Ray was the dependable one, the rock. He worked construction, managed crews, showed up on time even when his back screamed and his hands ached from years of gripping tools in the cold. His wife Martha trusted him completely, the way you trust sunrise, the way you trust gravity. She had no reason not to. Ray had never given her one, at least not one she knew about. Chris was the success story, the one who'd clawed his way up from nothing. His father had been a mechanic who drank his paychecks, and Chris had sworn he'd never end up like that. So he hustled, smiled, sold cars to people who couldn't afford them, and convinced himself that ambition wasn't the same as greed. His dealerships had his name on them in letters 10 feet tall. His wife Claire wore diamond earrings to the country club. Nobody asked where the first dealership's down payment had really come from. And Joel was the watcher, the one who remembered everything because he rarely spoke. He worked as a night supervisor at a warehouse in Dixon City, the kind of job where you spend hours alone with your thoughts and no distractions to stop them from eating you alive. He'd never married, never had kids. When people asked why, he'd shrug and say he liked his freedom. But the truth was simpler and sadder. Joel didn't trust himself to build anything real because he knew how quickly real things could be destroyed. They'd been friends since middle school, that particular kind of male friendship that survives on shared history rather than actual intimacy. They rarely talked about feelings, never discussed fears, but they showed up for each other's kids' birthdays and helped each other move and gathered every few months to watch Penn State games and pretend they were still the invincible 22-year-olds who'd gotten matching tattoos after winning a regional softball tournament they'd forgotten about by Tuesday. The tattoo had been Danny's idea, of course. 3 interlocking circles representing the 3 values they'd drunkenly declared sacred that night: loyalty, courage, and silence. The cross in the center was supposed to symbolize faith, though none of them went to church regularly, and Chris had admitted years later he wasn't even sure he believed in God. "It's not about religion," Danny had said, his words slurring as the tattoo gun buzzed against Marcus's arm. "It's about us. It's about knowing that no matter what happens, we've got each other's backs. Forever." Forever had seemed like a reasonable promise when you were 22 and drunk on cheap beer, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having truly failed at anything that mattered. But forever got complicated on October 14th, 2003. They'd been celebrating Marcus's 22nd birthday, though that was more excuse than reason. They'd started at Champ's Sports Bar on Mulberry Street, moved to Kelly's Pub on Adams, and ended up at some dive near the university whose name none of them could remember the next day. By midnight, they were hammered. By 1 a.m., they were invincible. By 2 a.m., They were 5 idiots piled into Chris's Ford Explorer, heading back towards Scranton on a road they'd driven 1,000 times, but never quite like this. With vision blurred and reflexes shot, and judgment so impaired that getting behind the wheel seemed not just acceptable, but inevitable. Chris was driving because it was his car. That was the only logic they'd used. Not that he was the least drunk. He wasn't. Not that he was the most experienced driver. Ray was. Just that it was his car, and in their alcohol-soaked reasoning, that made sense. Route 6. At 2:30 in the morning is darker than most people realize. The kind of dark where your headlights feel inadequate, where the road seems to narrow even though it hasn't, where every shadow could be something or nothing and you won't know until it's too late. They were singing, screaming really, some song that had been playing in the last bar. Marcus in the passenger seat, Danny and Ray in the back, Joel behind Chris with his head tilted against the window, already half asleep. They were happy. Stupid happy. The kind of happy that has no awareness of itself, no understanding that happiness is fragile and can shatter in the time it takes a tire to drift 6 inches to the right. The figure appeared so suddenly that later, when they replayed it in their minds during sleepless nights, it almost seemed impossible. One moment the road was empty. The next, there was a man, just standing there in the middle of the right lane, facing away from them, his back to the oncoming headlights. Chris saw him first. His hands jerked the wheel left, but not fast enough, not soon enough. The Explorer's right front bumper caught the man at hip level, and the sound, that sound would live in each of their memories forever, was nothing like the movies. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was soft, almost wet, like a heavy bag of sand being dropped on concrete. The man's body flipped up onto the hood, rolled over the windshield, which cracked in a spiderweb pattern but didn't shatter, and tumbled off the back as Chris slammed the brakes and the Explorer skidded 20 feet before stopping in the middle of the dark road. For 5 seconds, maybe 10, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. Then Danny said, his voice barely a whisper, "What the fuck just happened?" Marcus turned in his seat, looked back through the rear window. In the red glow of the taillights, he could see a shape on the pavement, not moving. "Is he?" Ray started, but couldn't finish the question. Chris's hands were still on the steering wheel, gripping so hard his knuckles had gone white. "He was just standing there," he said, his voice hollow. "He was just fucking standing there in the middle of the road. Why was he standing there?" Joel opened his door, stumbled out. The cold October air hit him like a slap, and suddenly the alcohol fog in his brain started to clear just enough to let terror seep in. He walked toward the body slowly, his legs unsteady, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. The others followed, forming a loose semicircle around the man lying face down on the asphalt. Joel knelt, put his hand on the man's shoulder, shook gently. Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. He rolled the man onto his back, and that's when they saw his face. He was maybe 40, 45, weathered skin, stubble on his jaw, a scar through his left eyebrow. He was breathing, shallow, ragged, but breathing. Blood trickled from his nose, his ears. His eyes were closed. "We have to call 911, Marcus said. "Right now." Danny pulled out his phone, looked at the screen. "No signal. We're in the middle of nowhere." "Then we drive until we get a signal," Marcus said. But Chris was shaking his head, backing away. "Do you guys understand what this means? We were drinking. I was driving. I'll lose everything. The dealership, my license, my—" "There's a man dying on the road," Marcus interrupted. "He jumped out in front of me." Chris's voice cracked. "You all saw it. He was just standing there. This isn't my fault." "It doesn't matter whose fault it is," Ray said quietly. "We have to get him help." "And then what?" Chris turned on him. "They test my blood alcohol. I go to prison. You all go down as accomplices. Is that what you want?" In the terrible silence that followed, each of them understood that they were standing at a crossroads, that the next decision would define who they were for the rest of their lives. And in that understanding, in that long moment where morality wrestled with fear and fear won, they made a choice that would haunt them for 20 years. They left him there. The little girl's name was Emily Rose Parker, and she had been a patient at Mercy General Hospital for 43 days. 43 days of needles and tests and doctors with tired eyes who spoke in careful voices that never quite promised anything. 43 days of sleeping in a bed that wasn't hers, eating food that tasted like cardboard, watching other children come and go while she stayed, always stayed, waiting for something the adults called a match. but never fully explained in a way that made sense to a 7-year-old mind. Her room was on the 3rd floor, pediatric wing, room 314. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow that was supposed to make sick children feel better, but instead just made everything look slightly jaundiced under the fluorescent lights. There were cartoon animals stenciled near the ceiling: a giraffe, an elephant, a lion with a mane that looked like someone had sneezed while painting it. Emily had spent so many hours staring at those animals that she'd given them names: Gerald, Esther, and Lawrence. She talked to them sometimes when the night nurses were busy at their station, and the hospital got so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. Her mother had been there for the first 2 weeks. Jennifer Parker, Jenny to everyone who'd known her before life got complicated, had slept in the uncomfortable chair beside Emily's bed, had held her hand through the scary procedures, had read her the same 3 picture books they'd brought from home until both of them could recite the words by heart. But then Jenny had to go back to work. The hospital bills were piling up. Insurance would only cover so much, and the double shifts at the Truck Stop Diner and Wilkes Bar were the only thing keeping them from losing their apartment. "I'll be back on Sunday," Jenny had promised, kissing Emily's forehead with lips that trembled. "I'll bring your stuffed rabbit, the blue one you like." That had been 12 days ago. Sunday had come and gone. The blue rabbit never arrived. The nurses said her mother called every night to check on her, but Emily was always asleep when the calls came, and by morning, the promises felt like dreams that faded in daylight. So Emily had learned to be alone in a way that no 7-year-old should have to learn. She'd learned which nurses were the kind ones who'd sneak her extra apple juice, and which ones were too busy to notice when she was scared. She'd learned that if she was very quiet and very good, adults would smile at her with a sadness that felt worse than anger. She'd learned that asking about her father made people uncomfortable, made them exchange glances and change the subject. So she'd stopped asking, but she never stopped thinking about him. David Parker had disappeared when Emily was 4 years old. One morning he was there, making her pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse ears, laughing at something on the radio, promising to teach her how to ride a bike without training wheels, and by that evening, he was gone. Her mother said he'd left, that he'd made choices, that sometimes people don't come back, and that was okay. They'd be fine without him. But Emily remembered something different. She remembered her mother crying in the bathroom with the door closed. She remembered hearing the word accident whispered during a phone call her mother didn't know she was listening to. She remembered asking years later why Daddy left, and her mother's face going pale and tight and wrong before she said, "Because some men aren't strong enough to stay." Emily had one photograph of her father. She kept it folded inside her favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are, pressed between the pages where Max sails back home. In the photo, David Parker was young, maybe 30, sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck with the sun behind him. He was smiling, squinting against the light, and his right arm was visible, extended toward the camera as if reaching for whoever was holding it. On that arm, just below the elbow, was a tattoo, 3 interlocking circles with a small cross in the center. When Emily had asked her mother about it, Jenny had looked at the photo for a long time before answering. "He got that with some friends when he was younger," she'd finally said. "Before I knew him. He said it meant something about promises and brotherhood. Men stuff, you know." Emily had traced the circles with her small finger. "It's pretty. I guess," Jenny had said, her voice distant. "I always thought it looked like handcuffs." The doctors said Emily needed a kidney transplant. They used bigger words: end-stage renal disease, congenital abnormality, dialysis, donor compatibility. But what it meant in simple terms was that Emily's kidneys were failing, and without a transplant, she would die. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually. Certainly. Her mother wasn't a match. Neither were her maternal grandparents, though her grandmother had gotten tested despite being 74, and in no condition to donate anything. Emily had no siblings, no cousins, no extended family tree to shake for compatible branches. Her father's side was a mystery. Jenny had met David when he'd already cut ties with his family, and she'd never pressed for details. So Emily's name went on a list, the National Transplant Waiting List. And every day she waited while her body slowly betrayed her, while the dialysis machine hummed beside her bed 3 times a week, while doctors and nurses smiled and said things like, "Stay hopeful," and "Miracles happen," in voices that suggested they'd learned not to believe their own words. On this particular evening, the evening when she'd encountered 5 men in the waiting room, the evening when everything would begin to unravel, Emily had been restless. The dialysis session that afternoon had left her feeling weak and nauseated, and she couldn't sleep. The night nurse, a kind woman named Patricia who had grandchildren Emily's age, had suggested she take a short walk. "Just to the water fountain and back," Patricia had said. "Get your legs moving, honey. Sometimes that helps." So Emily had disconnected her IV pump from the wall outlet. She'd learned how to do this herself weeks ago, and ventured out into the hallway. The hospital at night was different from the hospital during the day. Quieter, darker, filled with sounds that seemed louder in the absence of daytime chaos. The squeak of her IV pole wheels, the distant beep of monitors, the low murmur of television sets behind closed doors. She'd made it to the waiting room when she saw them. 5 men in matching jerseys, their attention focused on a game none of them seemed to actually be watching. She might have walked right past them. She'd learned to be invisible around adults, learned that being noticed sometimes meant being pitied, except one of them shifted in his seat, and his sleeve rode up, and there it was, the same tattoo, the exact same 3 circles, the same small cross, in the same position on the arm. Emily's heart had started pounding, not from fear, but from something deeper and more desperate. Recognition, connection, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, one of these men knew something about her father, knew where he'd gone, knew why he'd left, knew if he'd ever thought about coming back. She'd approached the man, Marcus, though she didn't know his name yet, and spoken before she could convince herself not to. My daddy had the same tattoo, and in the terrible silence that followed, in the way all 5 men had frozen as if someone had pressed pause on their lives, Emily understood something that children shouldn't have to understand, that sometimes the truth people are hiding is bigger and darker than the lies they tell. The man whose arm she'd touched, Marcus, was staring at her now with an expression she couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or guilt, or both. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Emily tilted her head, studying his face. He had kind eyes, she thought, the kind of eyes her father had in the photograph, tired, but kind. "Do you know my daddy?" she asked again, her voice smaller this time, uncertain. Before Marcus could answer, a nurse appeared at the entrance to the waiting room. "Emily, honey, what are you doing out here? Patricia's looking for you." Emily glanced back at the nurse, then at Marcus, then at the other 4 men who were all staring at her now with faces that looked like they'd seen a ghost. "I was just asking about tattoos," Emily said quietly. The nurse, young, blonde, someone Emily didn't recognize, smiled that professional smile that healthcare workers perfect after their first year. "Well, it's time to get back to bed. Come on, sweetheart." Emily let the nurse guide her away, but she looked back over her shoulder once. The 5 men hadn't moved. They sat frozen in their chairs, and even from across the room, even at 7 years old with limited understanding of adult emotions, Emily could see that something had broken among them, something that maybe had been broken for a very long time, and her question had simply been the crack that finally let all the pieces fall apart. Back in room 314, Emily climbed into bed and pulled the thin hospital blanket up to her chin. Gerald the giraffe stared down at her from the wall. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her father's voice sounded like, but she couldn't remember anymore. She could only remember the tattoo and the promise he'd made that he'd never explained. "Only very brave men," he'd said. Emily fell asleep wondering if brave men ever came back, or if being brave meant something different than she'd been taught to believe. The waiting room remained silent for exactly 47 seconds after Emily disappeared down the hallway. Marcus counted them, each second stretching like taffy, because focusing on numbers was easier than processing what had just happened. 47 seconds of 5 men breathing in shallow gasps, of the football game playing to an audience that no longer existed, of fluorescent lights humming their indifferent song above heads that felt too heavy to lift. Danny broke first. That was David Parker's daughter. His voice cracked on the name, and he immediately looked like he regretted speaking at all. Jesus Christ, that was his daughter. "We don't know that," Chris said, but even he didn't sound convinced. His hands were shaking as he bent to pick up his phone from where it had fallen earlier. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb pattern spreading from the corner that looked uncomfortably familiar. "She said he disappeared," Ray whispered, his face gray under the harsh lights. "She said he had the same tattoo. Same spot. How many people have this exact tattoo in this exact place?" "It could be a coincidence," Chris insisted, his voice getting louder, desperate. "It's a simple design. Maybe lots of people—" "Stop." Joel's voice cut through the rising panic like a blade. He'd finally moved from his position by the window, and now he stood in the center of their loose circle, his jaw clenched so tight that tendons stood out in his neck. Just stop lying. We all know who that was. Marcus's hands were still trembling. He looked down at the tattoo on his arm. The 3 circles, the cross, the promise they'd made when they were too young and stupid to understand that some promises should never be kept. He lived, Marcus said quietly. After that night. We looked it up, remember? We checked the news for weeks. There was nothing. No reports, no obituaries, nothing. Maybe he didn't report it, Danny said. Maybe he was, I don't know, doing something illegal out there. Maybe that's why he was standing in the middle of the road at 2 in the morning. So that makes it okay? Joel's voice was sharp. That makes it okay that we left him bleeding on the pavement? I didn't say it was okay, Danny shot back, his face flushing. I'm just saying maybe there's a reason he didn't go to the police. Maybe he couldn't. Ray stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. We need to get out of here. We need to leave before... Before what? Marcus looked up at him. Before we accidentally run into his daughter again. Before we have to explain why 5 men who supposedly never knew her father all have the exact same tattoo he had. You're being paranoid, Chris said, but his eyes kept darting toward the hallway where Emily had disappeared. She's a kid. She doesn't understand. She's not going to what? Joel interrupted. Connect the dots? Figure out that 5 men who were all friends 20 years ago, who all have matching tattoos, might have something to do with why her father disappeared? The air in the waiting room felt thick, suffocating. On the television, the Penn State kicker lined up for a field goal that would tie the game. None of them watched. We agreed, Chris said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That night, we all agreed. We swore we'd never talk about it. We swore we'd move on and never look back. Well, the past just looked us in the face, Marcus said bitterly. And it's 7 years old and hooked up to an IV. Danny pulled out his phone, started scrolling frantically. David Parker, he muttered, typing into a search engine. Pennsylvania, accident, missing person. What are you doing? Ray hissed, glancing around to make sure no one was watching them. I'm trying to figure out what happened to him, Danny said. If he lived, if he really just disappeared, there has to be some record, some... He stopped scrolling, his face going white. Oh God. What? 4 voices spoke simultaneously. Danny turned his phone around, showed them the screen. It was an old Facebook post from a missing persons group, dated April 2004, 6 months after that night on Route 6. The post had a photo of a man Marcus recognized immediately, even though he'd only seen his face once, in the red glow of taillights with blood trickling from his nose. David Parker. Age 32. Last seen October 2003. If you have any information, please contact... He was never found, Danny said, his voice hollow. They declared him legally dead in 2011. His wife, Jennifer Parker, filed the papers. There's a whole thread here about how mysterious it was, how he just vanished without a trace, how some people thought he ran away, but his family insisted he wouldn't do that. He had a daughter. He loved his daughter. Stop, Marcus said. Just stop. But Danny kept scrolling, his voice mechanical, as if reading the words might somehow make them less real. There's a comment here from his wife, from 2009. She says, David wouldn't have left Emily. He talked about her constantly. Whatever happened to him, it wasn't by choice. Someone knows something. Someone always knows something. The silence that followed felt like drowning. He died, Joel said finally. That's what this means. He died from the injuries and someone... His body was found somewhere, dumped, and they never connected it to the accident on Route 6 because we never reported it. You don't know that, Chris said, but his voice was weak. Yes, I do. Joel's eyes were fierce now, angry in a way Marcus had rarely seen. And you know what the worst part is? We could have saved him. If we'd called 911 right away, if we'd gotten him help instead of spending 20 minutes arguing about whose fault it was and what would happen to Precious Chris and his precious dealership. That's not fair, Chris said, standing now, his face red. You all agreed. Every single one of you agreed to leave. You don't get to put this all on me. You were driving, Joel shot back. And you were in the car. Chris's voice echoed through the waiting room, loud enough that a nurse at the station looked up sharply. He lowered his voice, but the fury remained. We're all guilty, every single one of us. So don't stand there acting like you're better than me just because you feel bad about it. I do feel bad about it, Joel said, his voice breaking. I feel bad about it every single day. I see his face every time I close my eyes. I hear that sound, the sound of the impact, when it's quiet. Don't tell me I don't feel guilty. Then what do you want? Chris asked, spreading his hands. What do you want us to do? Turn ourselves in? Confess to a 20-year-old hit and run that we can't even prove happened because there's no body, no evidence, nothing but 5 drunk idiots who made a terrible decision? His daughter is in this hospital, Marcus said quietly. All eyes turned to him. She's sick. Did you see the IV? The brace on her leg? She's sick, and she's alone, and her father is dead because of us. We don't know that she's sick, Danny said weakly, but even as he said it, they all knew. They'd all seen the pallor of her skin, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she moved like every step cost something. The pediatric wing wasn't for kids with broken legs. Ray sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. My daughter is Emily's age, he said, his voice muffled. Emma just turned 8. Every time I look at her, I think... He stopped, swallowed hard. I think about that little girl growing up without a father, and I know we did that. We took her father away. So what do we do? Danny asked, and this time the question wasn't rhetorical. It was real, desperate, searching for an answer that might not exist. The 5 of them looked at each other, and in their faces was the weight of 20 years of silence, of marriages built on foundations with cracks they'd never acknowledged, of careers and reputations and normal lives constructed carefully around a secret that had just walked up to them and said, "My daddy had the same tattoo." On the television, Penn State missed the field goal. The opposing team celebrated. The game was over. But in the waiting room of Mercy General Hospital, a different kind of game was just beginning. One where the stakes were measured not in points, but in souls. And the clock had been ticking for 20 years without any of them realizing that time, eventually, always runs out. Marcus didn't go home that night. He told Sarah he was staying at Danny's, that they'd had too much to drink watching the game and it was safer to crash on the couch. It was the first time he'd lied to his wife in 11 years of marriage, and the ease with which the words came out terrified him almost as much as what had happened in the waiting room. Instead, he sat in his truck in the hospital parking lot until 3 in the morning, staring at the 3rd-floor windows of the pediatric wing, trying to figure out which room belonged to Emily Parker. The building was mostly dark except for scattered squares of light where nurses made their rounds, or machines beeped their steady warnings that someone, somewhere, was fighting to stay alive. He'd pulled up Emily's mother on Facebook after Danny had found the missing persons posts. Jennifer Parker, 34 years old, worked at the Route 115 diner, lived in a basement apartment in Wilkes-Barre, posted photos of Emily on every birthday with captions like, "My whole world," and "Stronger than she knows." The most recent post was from 3 weeks ago, a photo of Emily in a hospital bed, smiling despite the IV in her arm, holding up a stuffed elephant someone had given her. The caption read, "Day 22, still waiting for our miracle. Please keep praying." Marcus had read through the comments. Friends and coworkers sending hearts and prayer emojis, distant relatives promising to visit soon but probably never would, and one comment from Jennifer herself, posted at 2 in the morning. "I can't lose her too. I already lost David. I can't lose her too." Those words had punched a hole through Marcus's chest that hadn't stopped bleeding. The next morning, Marcus returned to the hospital. He told himself he was just checking, just making sure Emily was okay, just trying to understand the situation before making any decisions. But the truth was simpler and more pathetic. He didn't know what else to do. He found a coffee shop across the street from Mercy General and sat by the window, watching the entrance. At 7:15, Jennifer Parker arrived. She looked exactly like her photos, but somehow more worn down, more translucent, as if she were slowly disappearing under the weight of worry. She wore scrubs, teal with cartoon hearts on them, and carried a backpack that probably contained clean clothes for Emily and whatever small comforts a mother could fit into a bag when her child was dying. Marcus watched her disappear through the sliding glass doors, and 20 minutes later, he followed. The hospital during the day was a different creature than at night. Bustling, bright, full of purposeful movement. Doctors with clipboards, nurses pushing medication carts, families holding cups of terrible coffee, and wearing expressions that ranged from hopeful to devastated. Marcus moved through the lobby like a ghost, invisible in his jeans and Penn State hoodie, just another visitor in a building full of people who'd rather be anywhere else. He took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The pediatric wing had murals on the walls, rainbows and castles and smiling suns that felt obscene in their cheerfulness. A sign pointed toward rooms 301, 320. Marcus followed it, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Room 314. The door was partially open. Through the gap, Marcus could see Emily sitting up in bed and Jennifer beside her, brushing her daughter's dark hair with gentle strokes that spoke of routine, of ritual, of a mother trying to maintain normalcy in a place where normalcy had no business existing. "And Mrs. Chen said you can come back to class whenever you're ready," Jennifer was saying, her voice artificially bright. "She said everyone misses you. Tommy drew you a picture of a unicorn. She's going to bring it tomorrow." "Tommy draws unicorns that look like dogs," Emily said, but she was smiling. "Well, it's the thought that counts," Jennifer said, setting down the brush. "How are you feeling today? Any pain?" "Just tired," Emily said. "The dialysis makes me tired." "I know, baby, I know." Marcus knew he should leave. He had no right to be here, no right to witness this intimate moment between mother and daughter, but his feet wouldn't move. He stood frozen in the hallway, gripping his coffee cup so hard the lid popped off and lukewarm liquid sloshed onto his hand. He didn't feel it. "Mama?" Emily's voice was softer now, hesitant. "Yes, sweetie? Last night I saw some men with Daddy's tattoo. The same one. All 5 of them had it." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Jennifer's hands stilled. "What?" "In the waiting room. I went to get water and there were 5 men watching football and one of them had the exact same tattoo as Daddy. The circles and the cross. I asked if he knew Daddy, but the nurse came before he could answer." There was a long silence. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had changed. Harder, sharper, like something had crystallized inside her. "Did they say anything to you?" "No, they just looked scared." "Scared?" "Yeah, like when you ask a question and people don't want to answer it." Another silence. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, loud as thunder in his ears. "Emily," Jennifer said carefully, "your father knew a lot of people before I met him. Some of them weren't good people. If you see those men again, I want you to stay away from them, okay?" "But Mama, Daddy said the tattoo meant promises. Maybe they know where he went. Maybe they can—" "Emily," Jennifer's voice cracked. "Baby, listen to me. Your father is gone. He's been gone for a long time. Those men, whoever they are, they can't help us. Nobody can help us. We just have to keep waiting for a donor and praying," and her voice broke completely. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, baby." "Don't cry, Mama," Emily said, and Marcus heard rustling as the little girl probably reached for her mother. "It's okay. We're okay." But they weren't okay. Marcus could hear it in Jennifer's muffled sobs, could feel it radiating through the partially open door like radiation. They weren't okay, and it was his fault. His and Danny's and Ray's and Chris's and Joel's. 5 men who'd valued their own comfort over a stranger's life, and now that stranger's daughter was dying while her mother worked double shifts and apologized for crying. Marcus backed away from the door slowly, carefully, his vision blurred. He made it to the elevator, down to the lobby, out to the parking lot before he doubled over behind his truck and vomited coffee and bile onto the asphalt. His phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "We need to talk. All of us. Tonight." Another from Ray. "My wife asked why I came home so late. I don't know how much longer I can keep lying." Another from Chris. "Found a lawyer. We need to discuss options." Joel sent nothing, but somehow his silence was the loudest message of all. Marcus got in his truck and drove. Not home. He couldn't face Sarah yet. Not to work. He'd already called in sick. He just drove aimlessly, through Scranton streets, past the high school where they'd all met, past the bar where they'd started drinking that night, past the turnoff for Route 6 where everything had gone wrong. He ended up at St. Mary's Cemetery on the east side of town. He wasn't sure why he'd come here until he was walking through the rows of headstones, reading names and dates, thinking about how everyone ended up in the same place eventually, under dirt, with their secrets buried with them. Except David Parker wasn't here. David Parker didn't have a grave because David Parker's body had never been found. He existed in a state of permanent absence, neither confirmed dead nor possibly alive, trapped in the terrible limbo of missing, while his daughter grew up without him, and his wife worked herself to exhaustion, and 5 men who knew the truth carried on with their lives as if they deserved to. Marcus found an empty bench near a statue of the Virgin Mary and sat down. He pulled out his phone and opened his photos. Scrolled back years until he found what he was looking for. A picture from 2003, from the night they'd gotten the tattoos. All 5 of them, arms around each other's shoulders, holding up their fresh ink to the camera, grinning like idiots. They looked so young, so stupid, so convinced that friendship and loyalty were the same thing as silence and complicity. Marcus stared at that photo for a long time, at their smiling faces, at the tattoos that had seemed like such a good idea at the time. 3 interlocking circles: loyalty, courage, silence. They'd gotten the silence part right. But loyalty and courage? Those had died on a dark stretch of road 20 years ago, and no amount of pretending could bring them back. His phone rang. Ray's number. Marcus answered. Yeah. Where are you? Ray's voice was strained, urgent. Cemetery. Why? Joel went to the hospital. He's talking to Emily's mother. Marcus's heart stopped. What? He's telling her everything, Marcus. He's confessing. Chris is on his way there now to stop him, but I think it's too late. I think Joel's going to burn everything down. Marcus was already running back to his truck, phone pressed to his ear, Ray's voice still talking, but Marcus couldn't hear the words anymore over the roaring in his head. 20 years of silence, ending in a hospital room where a dying child asked questions no one wanted to answer. The reckoning they'd avoided for 2 decades had finally arrived, and there was no more road left to run. Marcus broke every speed limit between St. Mary's Cemetery and Mercy General Hospital. His truck's engine roared as he weaved through mid-morning traffic on Scranton's expressway, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, Ray's words echoing in his head like a curse. Joel's confessing. Joel's burning everything down. He arrived at the hospital in 12 minutes, a drive that should have taken 25. He abandoned his truck in a loading zone, didn't bother locking it, just ran through the sliding glass doors and straight to the elevators. An elderly woman with a walker gave him a concerned look as he jabbed the 3rd floor button repeatedly, as if pressing it harder would make the elevator move faster. When the doors finally opened on the pediatric wing, Marcus stepped into chaos. Chris was there, standing in the middle of the hallway outside room 314, his expensive suit jacket discarded on a chair, his silk tie loosened, his carefully styled hair disheveled. He was arguing in a harsh whisper with someone Marcus couldn't see yet, his face red with a fury that Marcus had only witnessed once before, the night on Route 6, when fear had turned to anger, and anger had turned to the worst decision of their lives. Absolute insanity, Chris was hissing. Do you understand what you're doing? Do you have any idea what this will do to all of us? I don't care anymore. Joel's voice was steady, calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he'd been shouting. I stopped caring somewhere around 3 a.m. when I realized I haven't had a decent night's sleep in 20 years. Marcus approached slowly, his heart hammering. 2 nurses at the station were watching the confrontation with barely concealed concern. One of them with her hand hovering near the phone, ready to call security if things escalated. Joel, Marcus said quietly, and both men turned to look at him. Joel's eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in stubble, his clothes the same ones he'd been wearing last night. He looked like a man who'd been awake for days, which maybe he had. Maybe they all had, in a way. Maybe none of them had really slept since October 14th, 2003. Marcus, Joel said, and there was something like relief in his voice. Good. You should hear this too. You all should. Hear what? Marcus asked, though he already knew, could feel it in the electric tension of the hallway, in the way Chris looked like he wanted to throw Joel through the nearest window. The truth, Joel said simply. I'm telling Jennifer Parker the truth about what happened to her husband. The world tilted. Marcus grabbed the wall to steady himself. You can't. I already did. Joel's voice was hollow, but underneath the exhaustion was something else. Peace, maybe. Or resignation. She's in there right now processing it. I told her everything. The party, the drinking, the accident, how we left him on the road and never called for help. How we spent 20 years pretending it never happened while she spent 20 years wondering what happened to the man she loved. Chris made a sound like a wounded animal. Do you know what you've done? Do you know? My dealerships, my reputation, my family. Your dealerships? Joel's voice turned sharp, cutting. Your reputation? David Parker is dead, Chris. His daughter is dying, and you're worried about your fucking car dealerships? She's not dying because of us, Chris shot back. Her kidney disease has nothing to do with... She's dying alone because we took her father away. Joel's voice rose, no longer a whisper, and the nurses at the station stood up. She's in there right now, hooked up to machines, waiting for a donor that might never come, and her mother is working herself to death to pay for it because David Parker isn't here to help. Because we left him bleeding on a road and drove away like cowards. "We were scared," Chris said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "We were kids. We made a mistake. We were 22 years old," Joel said. "Old enough to drink, old enough to drive, old enough to know that you don't leave someone dying on the side of the road. And we're not kids anymore, Chris. We're men in our 40s with families and careers and mortgages, and we've spent 2 decades building lives on top of a lie. Well, I'm done. I'm done lying. I'm done pretending. I'm done looking at myself in the mirror and seeing a coward." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rough, broken. "What did she say?" "Jennifer. What did she say when you told her?" Joel's face crumpled slightly, the first crack in his strange calm. "She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, holding Emily's hand, staring at me like I was speaking a language she didn't understand. Then she asked me to repeat it. So I did. Every detail. The bar, the road, the impact, how we drove away. And when I finished, His voice broke. She asked me if David suffered, if he was in pain, if he called out for her. The hallway was silent except for the ever-present beep of monitors, the hum of fluorescent lights, the sound of 3 grown men trying not to break apart completely. I told her I didn't know," Joel continued, "that we didn't check, that we were too scared and too selfish to even see if he was conscious. And then she asked me to leave." "That's it?" Chris asked, his voice desperate. "She just asked you to leave? She didn't threaten to call the police? She didn't—" "She's in shock," Marcus said quietly. "She's processing. But Chris, you know as well as I do that she's going to call the police. We're done. Joel just ended all of us." "Good," Joel said, and there was steel in his voice now. "Maybe we deserve to be ended." The door to room 314 opened. All 3 men froze. Jennifer Parker stood in the doorway. Up close, Marcus could see the resemblance to Emily. The same dark hair, the same sharp cheekbones, the same eyes that looked too large for her face. But where Emily's eyes held innocent curiosity, Jennifer's held something else entirely. Grief, rage, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that Marcus recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror for 20 years. She looked at Joel first, then at Marcus and Chris. Her gaze was surgical, dissecting, seeing through every defense they'd built. "You're the others," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus wanted to deny it, wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the floor. But Joel's confession had stripped away that option, so he just nodded. Jennifer's hands were shaking. She crossed her arms over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together through sheer force of will. 20 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 20 years I thought David left us. 20 years Emily grew up believing her father abandoned her. 20 years I worked 3 jobs and told my daughter stories about how Daddy just couldn't handle being a parent, how some people aren't strong enough for responsibility, how we were better off without him. "Mrs. Parker," Chris started, but she held up a hand. "Don't." The word was sharp as a blade. "Don't you dare speak to me. I don't want to hear excuses or apologies or whatever corporate bullshit you were about to say. My husband died on a road while you drove away. My daughter is dying in that room because her father isn't here to be tested as a donor. Do you understand? If David had been alive, if he'd been here, he could have saved her. His kidney could have saved her." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd never thought about it, never considered that David Parker might have been compatible, that their decision that night hadn't just taken a man's life, it might have taken his daughter's life too. "We didn't know," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "We didn't know he had a daughter. We didn't know." "You didn't check," Jennifer interrupted. "You hit a human being with your car and you didn't check if he was alive. You didn't call for help. You didn't do anything except save yourselves." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Do you know what David's last words to me were? The morning before he disappeared, he said, 'I'll be home soon. Tell Emily I love her.' That was it. That was the last thing he said, and I've replayed it in my head 10,000 times, wondering if I should have made him stay, if I should have known something was wrong, if I could have somehow prevented whatever happened." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady, controlled. "And now I find out that what happened was you. 5 drunk idiots who were too cowardly to face the consequences of their actions. 5 men who got to go home to their families and their jobs and their normal lives, while my husband bled out somewhere and my daughter grew up without a father." "What are you going to do?" Chris asked, and Marcus wanted to hit him for the naked fear in his voice, for making this about them when it should be about David and Emily and Jennifer. Jennifer looked at Chris for a long moment. Then she turned to Joel. You said you wanted to confess, that you couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Joel nodded. Are you willing to be tested? She asked. As a donor. For Emily. The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Joel's eyes widened. Yes, of course. If I'm compatible. And the rest of you? Jennifer's gaze swept over Marcus and Chris. Are you willing to be tested? All of you? Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Being tested meant medical records, meant documentation, meant a trail that connected them to Emily Parker, and by extension, to David Parker. But looking at Jennifer's devastated face, at the door behind her where a 7-year-old girl lay dying, he found he didn't care about consequences anymore. Yes, he said. Chris said nothing, his face pale, his hands trembling. Yes or no, Jennifer said, her voice hard. Are you willing to try to save the daughter of the man you killed? The word killed echoed through the hallway like a gunshot, and in that moment, 5 men who'd spent 20 years running from the truth finally stood still and faced what they'd done. The blood draw took 15 minutes per person, but those 15 minutes felt like hours compressed into seconds, time moving in strange lurches and pauses that made Marcus wonder if this was what dying felt like. Not the final moment, but the slow collapse before it, when you know the end is coming and there's nothing left to do but wait. They sat in a small testing room on the 2nd floor, the 5 of them lined up like criminals waiting for sentencing. Which, Marcus supposed, they were. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the transplant coordinator, was a tall Nigerian woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything anymore. She moved efficiently between them with her collection of vials and needles, her face professionally neutral, though Marcus caught her glancing at Jennifer Parker, who stood in the corner with her arms crossed, watching every movement with the intensity of a hawk guarding its nest. Joel went first. He rolled up his sleeve without hesitation, exposing the tattoo that had started all of this. Dr. Okonkwo paused for half a second when she saw it, her eyes flicking to the identical marks on the other 4 men's arms, but she said nothing. She tied the rubber tourniquet around Joel's bicep, tapped his inner elbow to raise the vein, and slid the needle in with practiced precision. Joel didn't flinch. He stared straight ahead at the anatomical chart on the wall, a cross-section of a kidney with all its parts labeled in clinical language that turned human organs into mechanical components. Renal cortex, medulla, nephrons, as if reducing Emily to biology might make what they'd done to her father seem less monstrous. How long? Joel asked quietly as Dr. Okonkwo pressed a cotton ball to his arm and secured it with medical tape. Results typically take 24 to 48 hours for basic compatibility, she said. If there's a potential match, we'll do more extensive testing. HLA typing, cross-matching, antibody screening. The full workup can take up to a week. Emily doesn't have a week, Jennifer said from the corner, her voice flat. Dr. Okonkwo's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the human underneath. I know. We're expediting everything we can. If one of these gentlemen is compatible, we'll move to surgery as quickly as medically safe. Ray went next, then Danny. Both of them avoided looking at Jennifer, avoided looking at each other. Danny's leg bounced nervously as the needle went in. That same anxious tick Marcus had noticed in the waiting room a lifetime ago. 24 hours. Had it really only been 24 hours since Emily had recognized the tattoo? It felt like years had passed, like they'd aged decades in the span of a single day. When it was Marcus's turn, he finally looked at Jennifer, really looked at her. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, not from age, but from squinting through too many double shifts under harsh diner lights. Could see the chapped skin on her hands from constant washing, the way her scrubs hung loose on her frame as if she'd forgotten to eat somewhere along the way. Could see, most devastatingly, the ghost of the young woman she'd been in the Facebook photos with David, smiling, hopeful, in love with a man who'd promised to come home and never did. I'm sorry, Marcus said as Dr. Okonkwo prepared his arm. The words felt pathetically inadequate, like offering a band-aid for a severed limb. Jennifer's eyes met his. Are you sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught? The question was a knife between his ribs, perfectly aimed, impossible to deflect. Marcus opened his mouth, searching for an answer that wouldn't be a lie, but what came out was just the truth, raw and unfiltered. Both, he said. I'm sorry for both, and I know that makes me a coward. Something flickered in Jennifer's face. Not forgiveness. She was too far from that, but maybe recognition. an acknowledgement that at least he wasn't trying to pretend he was better than he was. Chris was last. He'd been silent since Jennifer's ultimatum in the hallway, his face ashen, his expensive watch catching the light every time his hand trembled. When Dr. Okonkwo called his name, he stood slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. "I can't," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "I can't do this." Everyone turned to stare at him. "What?" Joel's voice was dangerous, barely controlled. "I have a family," Chris said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. 3 kids, a wife, employees who depend on me. If I get tested and I'm a match and this goes public, the trial, the media coverage, I'll lose everything. My dealerships, my reputation, your freedom," Jennifer finished coldly. "You're worried about going to prison." "Yes," Chris practically shouted it. "Yes, okay? I'm terrified. We could be charged with vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident, obstruction of justice. We could get 20 years. And for what? For a mistake we made when we were drunk kids who didn't know any better?" "David knew better," Jennifer said, her voice like ice. "David knew not to leave someone dying on the side of the road. Emily knows better, and she's 7 years old. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair." Jennifer's control finally snapped, her voice rising. "It's not fair that my husband is dead. It's not fair that my daughter is dying. It's not fair that I've spent 20 years working myself to the bone while you got rich selling cars to people who can't afford them. So don't talk to me about fair, and don't talk to me about your family when you took away mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. Chris looked around the room, searching for support, for someone to tell him he was right to be scared. But Marcus couldn't meet his eyes. Neither could Ray or Danny. Only Joel stared back, his expression a mix of disgust and pity. "Get tested or don't," Joel said quietly. "But if you walk out of this room without trying to save that little girl, if you choose your dealerships over her life, then you're not the person I thought you were. You're not even the person we were that night on Route 6. You're something worse. You're someone who had a chance to make it right and chose yourself instead." Chris's face crumpled. For a moment, Marcus thought he might cry. But then something hardened in his features, some last defense mechanism clicking into place. "Fine," Chris said, sitting down heavily in the chair. "Test me. But I want a lawyer present when we discuss what happens next. I want immunity guarantees. You want to negotiate?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp, bitter. "My daughter is dying, and you want to negotiate?" "Mrs. Parker," Dr. Okonkwo interjected gently, "I need to focus on the medical aspect right now. The legal issues, those are separate. Let me get the samples, run the tests, and we'll know more in 24 hours. She drew Chris's blood in tense silence. When she was done, she labeled all 5 vials carefully, her handwriting precise and methodical. Marcus watched her work and wondered what she thought of them. These 5 men with matching tattoos and matching guilt, showing up 20 years too late to save the daughter of a man they'd killed. "I'll call as soon as we have preliminary results," Dr. Okonkwo said, addressing Jennifer. "In the meantime, Emily's stable. The dialysis is holding her, but not for long," Jennifer finished. "I know, I've heard that speech before." After Dr. Okonkwo left, the 5 men stood to go, but Jennifer blocked the doorway. "One more thing," she said, and her voice carried a weight that made them all freeze. "I haven't called the police yet. I wanted to wait until we know if one of you can save Emily. But the moment those test results come back, the moment we know if she has a donor or not, I'm making the call. So whatever you need to do, tell your wives, call your lawyers, get your affairs in order. You have 24 hours, maybe 48 if we're lucky." "And if one of us is a match?" Danny asked, his voice small. "If we save her?" Jennifer's smile was sad, tired, empty of anything resembling warmth. "Then at least David's death will have meant something. At least his daughter will live. But it doesn't change what you did. It doesn't erase 20 years of lies. Saving Emily won't save you." She stepped aside, letting them pass. They filed out into the hallway like condemned men granted a brief reprieve, knowing that the clock was ticking, that somewhere in a lab their blood was being analyzed, their genetic codes compared against Emily's, their last chance at redemption measured in antigens and antibodies, and the cruel mathematics of biological compatibility. Marcus made it to the parking lot before his legs gave out. He sat on the curb, head in his hands, and for the first time in 20 years he let himself cry. Not quietly, not privately, but in great gasping sobs that shook his entire body. Ray sat down beside him, then Danny, then Joel. Chris stood apart, phone already pressed to his ear, calling his lawyer, already trying to control the damage, already thinking 3 moves ahead. And somewhere above them, on the 3rd floor, Emily Parker slept in room 314, unaware that 5 strangers with her father's tattoo had just given blood that might save her life or might mean nothing at all. The sun was setting behind Mercy General, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire, like judgment, like the end of something that should have ended 20 years ago, but was only now, finally, reaching its terrible conclusion. The call came 31 hours later, at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, that felt like the longest day in human history. Marcus was at work, pretending to operate a forklift while his mind replayed every moment of the past 2 days on an endless loop. Sarah had asked questions when he came home: why he looked so pale, why he wasn't eating, why he kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. He told her he might be getting sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. He felt sick. Sick with dread, sick with hope, sick with the terrible understanding that his entire life was balanced on the edge of a phone call that could come at any moment. When his phone finally rang, Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "Mr. Webb?" Dr. Okonkwo's voice was professional, controlled, but Marcus could hear something underneath it. "We have the results. Can you come to the hospital?" "Am I?" Marcus couldn't finish the question. His throat had closed up. "We need you to come in," Dr. Okonkwo repeated. "All 5 of you. Mrs. Parker has requested everyone be present." The call ended. Marcus stood in the warehouse, surrounded by stacks of lumber and the smell of sawdust, and knew that the next few hours would determine everything. Not just whether Emily lived or died, but who he would be for whatever years remained to him. A murderer who'd gotten away with it, a donor who'd tried to make things right, or something more complicated that lived in the gray space between redemption and damnation. By 3 o'clock, they were all gathered in Dr. Okonkwo's office. It was smaller than Marcus had expected, crowded with the 6 of them, 5 men and Jennifer Parker, who stood near the window as if she needed an escape route. Emily wasn't there. Jennifer had said she didn't want her daughter to hear any of this until they knew for certain what was going to happen. Okonkwo sat behind her desk, a manila folder open in front of her. She looked at each of them in turn, and Marcus realized she was trying to assess how much they could handle, how much truth the human heart could bear before it shattered completely. "I'll be direct," she said. "We found a match." The room seemed to contract and expand simultaneously. Marcus felt dizzy, untethered, like gravity had momentarily failed. "Joel Martinez," Dr. Okonkwo continued, her eyes settling on him. "You're a 6-antigen match for Emily. It's remarkable, actually. Not a perfect match. Those are incredibly rare outside of siblings, but close enough that the odds of rejection are minimal. With proper immunosuppression and monitoring, the prognosis is excellent." Joel's face had gone completely white. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "You're saying I can save her?" he finally whispered. "Yes," Dr. Okonkwo said simply. "If you consent to the surgery, if you pass the additional medical screening, and if everything goes well, yes, you can save Emily's life." Jennifer made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. She turned to face the window, her shoulders shaking, one hand pressed to her mouth. Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. A lessening of pressure. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this horror. "When?" Joel asked. "When can we do the surgery?" "We'll need to do more comprehensive testing," Dr. Okonkwo explained. "Cross-matching, viral screening, cardiac evaluation to make sure you're healthy enough to donate. It typically takes a few days, but given Emily's condition, we're expediting everything. If all goes well, we could schedule surgery as early as Friday." 3 days, Joel said. He looked at Jennifer, his eyes red-rimmed. 3 days, and Emily could be okay. Jennifer turned from the window. Her face was wet with tears, but her voice was steady. "Will he be okay? The donor? Will Joel be okay after the surgery?" It was the first time she'd shown any concern for any of them, and the kindness of it, the basic human decency of caring whether the man who'd helped kill her husband would survive donating his kidney, hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Living kidney donation is remarkably safe," Dr. Okonkwo said. "The risks are minimal. Most donors recover fully within 6 to 8 weeks and go on to live completely normal lives. Mr. Martinez would need to avoid contact sports and take certain precautions, but overall, people with 1 kidney do just fine." "I'll do it," Joel said. There was no hesitation in his voice. no doubt. Whatever you need from me, whenever you need it, I'll do it. Dr. Okonkwo nodded. We'll start the additional testing this afternoon. Mr. Martinez, if you'll come with me, we can begin. Wait. Chris's voice cut through the room. He'd been silent until now, sitting in the corner, his lawyer beside him. Before anything happens, we need to discuss the legal situation. My attorney has been in contact with the district attorney's office and… No! Jennifer's voice was sharp as a whip. No lawyers, no negotiations, not right now. Mrs. Parker, with all due respect. Chris's lawyer began, but Jennifer cut him off. My daughter is getting a kidney, she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. That is happening. After that, after Emily is safe and recovering, you can have all the legal discussions you want. You can hire 100 lawyers. You can negotiate and plea bargain and do whatever it is that rich men do when they're trying to avoid consequences. But right now, in this moment, the only thing that matters is saving my daughter's life. She turned to Joel. You're going to do the surgery. You're going to give Emily your kidney. And whatever happens after that, whatever jail time or fines or public humiliation you have to face, you're going to face it knowing that at least you did one good thing. At least you gave David's daughter a chance to live. Joel nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Thank you for letting me do this. The irony of it, Joel thanking Jennifer for the opportunity to donate an organ to the daughter of the man he'd helped kill, would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Dr. Okonkwo stood. Mr. Martinez, if you'll follow me. The rest of you… She paused, looking at Marcus, Ray, Danny, and Chris. I assume you'll want to stay? Yes, Marcus said. The others nodded. They spent the next 4 hours in various waiting rooms as Joel underwent test after test. Blood work, imaging, psychological evaluation, meetings with surgeons and anesthesiologists and social workers who asked questions designed to make sure he wasn't being coerced, that he understood the risks, that he was doing this for the right reasons. Marcus wondered what Joel said during the psychological evaluation. What did you tell a therapist when the reason you were donating a kidney was because you'd accidentally killed the recipient's father 20 years ago, and this was your only shot at something resembling redemption? At 7:30 p.m., Dr. Okonkwo returned with Joel. He looked exhausted but lighter somehow, as if the testing had burned away some invisible weight he'd been carrying. We're cleared for surgery, Dr. Okonkwo announced. Friday morning, 6 a.m., both patients will be prepped simultaneously. The procedure takes 3 to 4 hours. If all goes well, Emily could be in recovery by noon. Jennifer closed her eyes. Can I tell her? Can I tell Emily she's getting a kidney? Yes, Dr. Okonkwo said gently. Tell her she's getting a kidney from a very brave man. They all went to Emily's room together. Jennifer, Joel, Marcus, Ray, Danny, and even Chris, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but seemed incapable of leaving. Emily was awake, drawing on a sketch pad that one of the nurses had given her. When she saw them all crowding into her doorway, her eyes went wide. Mama? She said uncertainly. Jennifer knelt beside the bed, took her daughter's small hand. Baby, I have good news. We found you a donor. You're getting a kidney on Friday. Emily's face transformed. Not with joy. She was too young and had been sick too long to believe in miracles that easily, but with cautious, fragile hope. Really? Really? Jennifer said, her voice thick. This man… She gestured to Joel. He's going to donate his kidney to you. He's going to help you get better. Emily looked at Joel, studied his face with that unnervingly direct gaze that children have. Then her eyes dropped to his arm, to the tattoo that was partially visible beneath his shirt sleeve. You knew my daddy, she said. It wasn't a question. Joel's face crumpled. He knelt down too, so he was at Emily's eye level. Yes, he said, his voice barely audible. I knew your daddy. He was a good man. And I'm so sorry that he's not here. I'm so sorry for everything. Emily tilted her head, processing this. Are you giving me your kidney because you miss him too? The question was so innocent, so completely lacking in accusation, that it broke something in all of them. Marcus saw Ray turn away, saw Danny wipe at his eyes, saw even Chris's lawyer look uncomfortable. Yes, Joel said, because what else could he say? Yes, I'm giving you my kidney because I miss him, and because you deserve to grow up and have a life and be happy. And maybe this is what your daddy would have wanted. Emily considered this. Then she smiled. a small, tentative smile that reminded Marcus so much of David Parker in that old Facebook photo that his breath caught. "Okay," Emily said. "Thank you for your kidney." "You're welcome," Joel whispered. Outside the hospital, as the sun set and Friday loomed closer, the 5 men stood in the parking lot one last time. Jennifer had made it clear, after Emily's surgery, after she was stable and recovering, she was calling the police. They had 3 days of freedom left. 3 days to say goodbye to their families, to prepare for whatever was coming, to make peace with the fact that redemption had a price, and they were finally going to pay it. "I told my wife," Ray said quietly. "Everything. She's taking the kids to her mother's." "Mine too," Danny added. "Linda's filing for divorce. I don't blame her." Marcus nodded. "Sarah wants to talk after Friday. She's waiting to see what happens with the surgery before she decides anything." Chris said nothing. His lawyer had already drawn up plea agreements, immunity requests, character references. Chris would fight this until the end, would probably end up with the lightest sentence of all of them because that's how the world worked. The richest man always landed softest. But Joel looked at peace. "Worth it," he said simply. "Whatever happens to us, however long we go to prison, it's worth it if Emily lives." And standing in that parking lot, beneath a sky turning dark, with the weight of 20 years of silence finally lifting from their shoulders, the other 3 men realized he was right. They couldn't save David Parker, but maybe they could save his daughter, and maybe that would have to be enough. Some secrets are buried so deep we convince ourselves they've disappeared. But the truth has a way of surfacing when we least expect it, often in the most innocent form. A child's question, a familiar tattoo, a moment of recognition that shatters 2 decades of carefully constructed lies. 5 men learned that running from the past doesn't make it go away. It just means you're not facing forward when it finally catches up. They made a choice in a split second of fear and selfishness, and that choice echoed through 20 years, destroying not just the life of the man they left on that dark road, but the lives of everyone connected to him, his wife, his daughter, and ultimately themselves. Redemption came at a terrible price, but it came. And sometimes that has to be enough. Ask yourself, if you were standing at that crossroads with everything you'd built hanging in the balance, would you have the courage to confess? Would you sacrifice your freedom, your family's future, your reputation, to save the daughter of a man you'd wronged? It's easy to judge from a distance, but the hardest truths are the ones we face in the mirror. This story isn't just about 5 men and one terrible night. It's about all of us, about the moments when we choose convenience over conscience, silence over truth, and the weight we carry when we make those choices. The only difference is whether we eventually find the strength to put that weight down. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the decisions we make when no one's watching, and the prices we pay when those decisions come to light, please follow our channel, leave a like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below, would you have confessed, or would you have stayed silent? Your answer might surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end. Remember, the past never forgets, but sometimes neither does grace.